Hi, Thomas Emerson here. I'm the bereavement coordinator at St. Anthony's Hospice, also a chaplain. As bereavement coordinator, one of the things we do, and so as a hospice as a whole, we help people walk through their journey. And as far as grief goes, when does it start? Grief starts at diagnosis when it happens. And so as a team, our staff, our nurses, social workers, chaplains, and bereavement coordinator help people walk through their grief from the start to, and you know what? Sometimes the grief, it does not have an end. For instance, I have a scar that's right here. That happened when I was 10, but it's still there. So grief, is still with us. Grief goes on. At some point, the grief, the memories, all the memories, good memories, become stronger than the pain of the grief. And so in walking through that grief, and one of the things I want to talk about just for a second, what is grief? What is that? Well, in the dictionary and off the web, it says grief is a mental or emotional suffering or distress caused by loss or regret. It is especially used to refer to feelings of sorrow, of loss from the death of a loved one. And in hospice, that's what's happening. Lots of times there's a loss of a loved one. And so it's a big loss, big grief. And so what do we do? One, as bereavement coordinator, I help people walk through their grief. You're not alone in your grief. So knowing that there's someone here that will listen to you, they won't think you're crazy. They're helping you walk through your grief. And one, I use some of Dr. Alan Wolfelt, some of his information, and one of those is helping people to understand their grief. Understanding your grief because it's unique to you. Your relationship to your loved one is unique. For instance, a spouse to his wife. No one else has the same relationship. So the grief is different for him than it is for everyone else in the family. It's different. So walking through your grief in your time, in your pace, because it's your grief. And it's in here. And so the grief is in here, and so it has to come out in the morning, in the crying or the telling or the writing. So Dr. Allen, he talks about there's 10 touchstones of grief. One is being opening to the presence of your loss, meaning that I pay attention to the pain that's in here. And maybe I can only talk about it just a little bit at the time, but a little bit, I move towards my pain, and it helps me to walk through my grief. He talks about misconceptions of grief. People will say, well, just get over your grief. You can just get over it. You've had time, just get over it. You're okay now. Well, you know what? That's not true. That's not true. That's a misconception, because grief is in here and it may last for a very long time. It does, and it's different for everyone. In embracing your uniqueness of the grief, of the relationship you had with the loss. And then there are the feelings, emotional feelings that are inside, that are even behind the grief, that need to come out. Recognizing that, hey, you're not crazy. You're not. You're grieving. Grief is not a disease. It's something that happens on the inside when we have loss. It just does. And then understanding the 6 needs of mourning, and I'll talk about them in just a second. And another one is nurturing yourself, taking care of yourself. Dr. Allen talks about grief as a wilderness. And so sometimes you just need to take a step, and in taking a step, you might call me and we could have a chat and we could just talk. You could talk about your grief and we can walk through it together. There was a gentleman that I walked through for 2 years. I met with him once a week and we talked through his grief, and he was able to go through his grief. And so grief is something you go through. You can't go over it, under it, or around it. It's something you go through. The reaching out for help. So that's what I mean by calling us here at Hospice. We want to help you go through your grief. And as a team, it's a long journey sometimes of going through the process of loss with the family. 1 second, seeking reconciliation, and then appreciating the transformation that happens once you go through your grief. Because you're not the same anymore. It's not the same. That person's not here. It's not the same. And so in his book, he talks about the 6 needs of mourning. 1 is accept the reality of the death, that this person has died. Let yourself feel the pain of the loss. What does that mean? Well, it's giving myself permission to grieve. That means that I can say, this is my grief. I can go through my grief in my own pace, my own time. If somebody says, oh, just get over it, you could say, no, this is my grief. I'm going to go through my grief in my own time, in my own space. So, and then remembering the person who died. All those memories are in there, right there. The person that you love, their love is right there. And no one can take that away. No one can take the memories away. So you bring the memories into the present and you remember the person. And then you are developing a new self-identity, who you are without that person that's not there anymore. And then searching for meaning. What does this mean in all of this? And then letting others help you. And so we here at Hospice, we want you to know for sure that you're not alone in your grief and going through your grief. I have one thing I would like to read to you, and it talks about the remembering. You know, what is essential does not die, but clarifies, Thornton Wilder said. One of the ways we enrich our lives after a great loss is to sink ourselves in the study of that loved one's past, remembering. So now that he or she is no longer with us in the physical sense, we begin to understand in a new way the life of the one we loved who has died. What were the silent spaces in that life like? Perhaps we can only conjecture using our understanding of the person and what little we may know of particular periods of his or her life. Meaning, okay, so I go back to I find photos. Oh, there's a picture of him when he was a child. What was going on? Thinking about those kinds of things. A particular handkerchief he saved, or a bunch of dried flowers. While our memory of the person and the stories he or she told us are still fresh, are things we could write down to preserve those stories for the person's descendants. So, you know, one of the ways walking through grief is talking about it. If you have someone that will listen and they won't think you're crazy. So the grief is in here, and so the mourning is how it comes out. It comes out in the crying or the telling of the stories, remembering the stories, or maybe it is writing down in a journal, and we do have some things like that, resources here at Hospice. You can write things down, write memories, write in the journal, and it helps to get the grief from in here out. And so that's going through the pain of the grief. And so in the bereavement, so how do we do that? Well, one is right now, because of the coronavirus, I do a lot of bereavement by phone, and I can come to home and visit if you need that. And in the future, we're going to do some bereavement groups by Zoom, and hopefully soon, I don't know when that will be, that we can do bereavement groups again here at the Hospice office and other places. So with that, may the Lord be with you, walking through your grief, and know that you are not alone, because God is right there with you. He's with us. And then Hospice here, a team of people myself included in that, help you to walk through your grief. So that's what we're here to do, help you walk through your grief. As bereavement, we want you to know that you're suffering the grief, the hurt, the pain, that you're not hurting alone, that we walk through it with you. I can't fix it, I can't, but I can help you to walk through it. Thank you.